Hello, my name is Evelyn Salcedo, and me and my group are going to be presenting Lexsteel Corporation regarding their expenditure cycle. My group members' names are Christian, Megan, Stephanie, Gilbert, and Gabriel. So first, we're going to talk about the description of the expenditure cycle. In the expenditure cycle, they include activities like ordering, purchasing, receiving, approving, and paying for goods and services. These functions facilitate a recurring cycle between the purchase of raw materials to the cash disbursements to suppliers of Lexsteel Corporation. The expenditure cycle is put into place with the aim to minimize total cost of acquiring and maintaining inventories, supplies, and other services. Okay, this is the Lexsteel analysis on expenditure cycle. So the first process is the production process. Operational efficiency in Lexsteel begins with the production process that masters ordering enough materials, supplies, and services to maintain production without any stock cost. So stock cost means there's no shortage in inventory and production is able to fulfill any goods that are needed. Management is required to select suppliers depending on price, quality, and dependability in making deliveries. So they want to know if these suppliers are reliable to deliver their goods. Second, we have the purchasing process. So the purchasing process is a major function in the expenditure cycle because it's when Lexsteel first intends to place an order. During this process, Lexsteel must create a purchase order and send it out to their preferred supplier. So this is a picture of the purchase order. It's from who it ships to and who is creating the purchase order, the description of the inventory, and the quantity. Third, we have the receiving process, and this cycle consists of counting and inspecting the incoming deliveries. So the receiving clerk is the one receiving the incoming inventory, and they want to enter quantities, date and time of the received inventory and supplier number. Some precautions that the receiving clerk may take are store inventory in locations with restricted access, document any transfers of inventory from within, so if they're changing the inventory from facility to another facility within the same corporation, they want to document those transfers to not for any risk of loss. And third, we have to count inventory on hand to reconcile counts. Fourth, we have the approval of invoices. So this is the fourth step in the expenditure cycle, and the approval of supplier invoices is handled by the accounts payable department. And this process deals with assessing whether Lexsteel wants to approve the terms of the bill, which is the invoice, and they want to see if the supplier will provide them with those goods for that amount. Fifth, we have the accounts payable process, and this is the cash disbursements and it's the last activity in the expenditure cycle that is handled by a cashier. During this process, all accounts payable to suppliers are liquidated. For Lexsteel, we have a certain situation for the accounts payable department where they are paying their suppliers the last day possible to make a payment. So they're paying the last day before they receive a penalty, and this action will actually affect Lexsteel's cash flows because they're not receiving certain discounts that suppliers give to corporations that make their payments on time or beforehand. So they lack this discount that these suppliers give, and they can be possibly receiving these raw materials for cheaper, but because they don't make their payment earlier, then they don't get that discount. So this affects cash flows as a whole and the expenditure cycle as a whole because they lack those resources to purchase inventory to make more goods. And thank you.
Hi, my name is Megan, and I will be giving a brief overview on our document flowchart and some suggested internal controls for Lexsteel. The document flowchart begins with the purchasing process and preparing purchase orders. After the supplier accepts the order, it will then undergo the receiving process and prepare the receiving report to document the delivery details. A copy of the report goes to accounts payable, inventory control, and the master file. After the receiving process, the order goes to the accounts payable department, where the order is approved and authorized. Finally, the cashier is given authorization to initiate electronic funds transfer and complete the current expenditure cycle. Lexsteel currently has some strong internal controls that help benefit the company's effectiveness and efficiency. However, Lexsteel still has room for growth and can further improve its internal controls. Lexsteel does an effective job with monitoring its inventory. Only authorized personnel are allowed access into the inventory, and it will only be released for production with a proper authorization request. Once the request is approved, the perpetual inventory system is updated. Another positive internal control Lexsteel has is having an authorized purchasing manager review and approve purchases. Segregating duties will prevent any fraud from potentially occurring. Lexsteel currently has a satisfactory internal control concerning its inventory. As of now, Lexsteel does physical inventory counts every 3 months, causing cash flow difficulties. To solve this, Lexsteel should do cyclical routine inventory counts, resulting in a more accurate number for inventory and also solve any discrepancies that may occur. In the inventory department, the receiving clerk is in charge of inputting the quantity number and time and date received. Without proper verification, the receiving clerk is free to tamper with the system and falsify numbers. Having the receiving clerk sign for incoming inventory without being able to view the purchase order will prevent the clerk from having access to the purchase order and being able to edit or manipulate the data.
Hi, my name is Stephanie, and I will be giving you a visual representation of the processes Megan described through these flowcharts. To start, we have the purchasing process. The first component of this is to prepare the purchase order. As we know, the purchase order is basically a promise to pay, which becomes a contract once the supplier agrees to it. The purchase order then gets distributed to vendor, accounts payable, as well as receiving. At Lexsteel, the purchasing manager reviews and approves all purchases prior to emailing them to suppliers. Following this, the receiving process comes into play. The receiving process is the second major business activity in the expenditure cycle. It is basically the receipt and storage of ordered items. In Lexsteel's case, after counting and inspecting incoming deliveries, the receiving clerk enters the following information, which includes the quantity received for each inventory item, the date and time they were received, as well as the supplier number. So as we see here, from the vendor, we get the packing list, and from purchasing, we get the purchase order. From this, we are able to prepare the receiving report. The receiving report have details about every delivery, including the date that they were received, shipper, supplier, as well as purchase order number. Furthermore, the receiving report also contains space to identify the persons who received and inspected the goods, as well as any remarks and concerns to the quality of the items that were delivered. As we can see here, one copy of the receiving report goes to accounts payable, another one to the inventory control department, and lastly, another one to keep on our file so we can have a copy in our records. This would summarize the flowcharts. Christian will continue with accounts payable. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hello, I'm Christian, and following the receiving process, we make our way over to approve payment for the items received by ensuring in the accounts payable department that all of the elements contained within the voucher package are indeed present to guarantee the integrity of the payment process. This cross-entity check certifies that the order was recorded by Lexsteel with a purchase order. The supplier issued Lexsteel an invoice in conjunction with the request, and upon delivery of the requested items, the receiving report was created. From here, once the accounts payable department has verified with certainty that all three documents are the makeup of the voucher package, the cashier is finally authorized to initiate the electronic funds transfer in order to complete the current expenditure needs for the period or cycle. From here, we can see that one check is sent to the EFT to vendor, and the second check, a copy of the check, is placed on file. Lexsteel is an all-purpose raw steel manufacturing firm that produces the greatest output of 100% stainless grade steel and is also the country's leading supplier of raw materials for steel. Our all-purpose objective was met with obstacles such as proper labeling and management of inventory between raw materials and finished goods. Our raw materials tracking could be improved by implementing the perpetual inventory method backed by an enterprise resource planning system. Before Lexsteel did so by individually weighing each item of inventory. However, it has shifted to batch process its entire inventory and raw materials. This has helped ameliorate a number of shortcomings with respect to efficiency in our firm, and due to the vast applications of our steel products, we have no choice but to abandon the traditional method of physical inventory counting and to move on to radio frequency identification, RFID for short. Ultimately, these hindrances within the expenditure process that warranted possible and preventable risks throughout the cash distribution and collection cycles were solved. Without proper inventory capabilities and raw materials tracking, Lexsteel ran the risk of insolvency without proper cash flow reserves to deal with a serious crisis on a global scale. Only now does it have the ability to properly state with confidence the products it has on hand without a risk of stockouts or back orders.
Hello, my name is Gabriel Rodriguez. My colleague Gilbert and I will be discussing Lexsteel's internal controls. While reviewing the company's internal controls, our team was able to determine that Lexsteel has some proper internal controls to protect the entity. However, it needs to change and implement others to have a better functioning program. The most important thing to consider regarding internal controls is that an employee should not be able to physically manipulate the system, processes, or procedures for their own personal benefit. Any role where the possibility exists to have duties that allow any action should not be assigned to the same person. The company has stated that cash flow is a problem and as a result, pay their suppliers on the last day possible. It is evident that the company must take appropriate actions to ensure the profitability is optimized by protecting its assets. Lexsteel has an effective internal control to monitor its inventory. Its access to the inventory control department is restricted. Inventory is only released to production when an authorization request is submitted. Furthermore, as soon as this request is approved, the inventory clerk updates the perpetual inventory system. On the contrary, the internal control that can be improved on is the duration of when physical counts occur. Lexsteel physically counts its inventory every 3 months. As a company that suffers from cash flow difficulties, this duration is too long. Many companies have changed from this method, which shuts down operations for a full day, to a cyclical basis, meaning that employees who monitor inventory will constantly do it while concurrently filling their other tasks and duties. This will allow for a more accurate count of inventory and determination of discrepancies between quantities recorded and quantities on hand. If an investigation does occur, the information that will lead to a solution will be more readily available and the problem has a higher chance of being resolved.
Continuing with the internal controls, a positive internal control applied by Lexsteel is that purchases are reviewed and approved by an authorized purchasing manager before they are emailed to suppliers. This internal control is great as it follows the theme of separation of duties. As a purchasing clerk enters the order and then reviewed by a second party, this reduces tampering and creation of false purchase orders. Although this may seem simple, delegating multiple tasks to one person happens more than one would think, which allows for higher risks of fraud. A major weakness, again, is seen in the inventory department. The weakness occurs when incoming deliveries are received and counted by the receiving clerk. The receiving clerk inputs quantities of each item, supply number, date, and time received. On the surface, this may seem as an informative input requirement, yet allowing one person to input data alone without a verification system in place can be a great temptation for theft or tampering. Lexsteel can reinforce its weakness by requiring the receiving clerk to sign for quantities received without seeing the purchase orders. This would deter any manipulation by the receiving clerks, as they will not know the amount ordered and cannot have access to the purchase order to edit after receiving inventory. Lexsteel should improve its inventory handling system, as there are many opportunities where fraud and manipulation can occur.